Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Senza Fili Sparring Partners webinar on Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, and Wi-Fi 7. How will they change Wi-Fi? Our speakers today are Monica Paolini, Principal at Senza Fili, and Martha Suarez, President of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I will be moderating our webinar today. In Sparring Partners webinars, we watch our debaters discuss a topic live on video without slides. We would like to encourage our audience to participate in the conversation. Please share your comments and questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. Our speakers will do their best to address questions as they go along and as they become relevant to the topics being discussed. So please do not hold your questions until the end. And finally, I will be live tweeting the webinar today. You can follow along or participate in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Sparring Partners. And with that, I'll hand it over to Monica.
Thanks, Kendra. Again, it's a pleasure to be here all the time with you guys in the audience, but it's a special pleasure to be here with Martha Suarez, who has already been on a Sparring Partners, I think, last year. We were talking more about sharing spectrum and CBRS at that point. Today, we're going to be talking about Wi-Fi and the evolution, although we're going to be touching on other technologies as well. So, Martha, it's a pleasure to have you back, and it's always great talking to you. So let's get started to talk about what we're talking about Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, I think it's an incredible success story. I would say this is the most successful wireless technology because it celebrated its 20th birthday last year, and so it has been with us for a very long time, and it has evolved a lot, and it continues to evolve a lot. So today we're going to talk about what is the evolution and what is that we need in terms of spectrum allocations in order to support this evolution, because clearly there is no point having a technology if you don't have enough spectrum to use it. So we're going to be talking mostly about that, and we look forward to all your questions. So as many of you are familiar, you need to ask questions as we go along, because there's not going to be a Q&A at the end. So if you have your questions, fire them off right away. Now, with that, I would like Martha to introduce herself to those of you who were not lucky enough to be on the Sparring Partners last year, so we know more about what she's doing at the DSA. Martha.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Monica. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, and I really appreciate the invite. So just introduce myself. I work for the DSA. We are the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, and we are a global organization that promotes efficient use of the spectrum, and we have been actively supporting more spectrum for Wi-Fi in general, and access and license access to the 6 gigahertz band.
Excellent. And the DSA does a lot of work in promoting more efficient use of spectrum in all sorts of ways, not just Wi-Fi. And in fact, right now, I know you're busy preparing for the summit, your global summit that is going to be in June, from the 8th to the 10th of June. Can you tell us about this? Last year, it was a great event. Because because they're virtual, I feel like you can pay more attention to it because you're not distracted by all the other stuff. So it was a great one last year, and I think this year is going to be. Maybe you can tell us a little about what's going to happen there.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, please, all of you, all those that are watching this session, please register. We are going to have 5 sessions, less sessions than last year, taking into account that we are in a virtual environment and there are so many things going on. But we have decided to focus on the most relevant aspects of spectrum sharing. We will have different time zones. So sessions will be in different time zones because also we observed last year that it was hard for some participants in Middle East and Asia Pacific to join. And we are expecting a great success. Last year we had almost 600 participants, so we are also expecting that number this year.
Well, that's great. So okay, so this is pretty soon. So register if you're interested, and so let's talk a little bit about Wi-Fi. So why are we doing why are we spending 1 hour talking about Wi-Fi when everybody's using, everybody's reasonably happy with it? Why do we need to talk about it? What's new? What's coming up here? Do you wanna?
Well, one of the main trends is that technology is providing more solutions. There are many opportunities to improve. The new version of Wi-Fi6 is already available. Wi-Fi6e is also there. So it means Wi-Fi in the 6 gigahertz band. And we even started discussions about Wi-Fi7, and there are many advancements at this point. So the part that is missing right now is having in place the right regulatory frameworks. So we can use that spectrum. I mean, everyone, because there are billions of users of Wi-Fi, we can use that spectrum to provide better broadband connectivity. And there are many use cases. It could be at home, that has been really important during this COVID-19 situation, and stay working at home, studying from home. But also there are many great applications, like very low power applications that will provide the needed connections for augmented reality and virtual reality. And also there are important standard power applications that are relevant for outdoors connectivity. So, so I think the reason why we are really observing a great momentum is because there is a perfect match between the technology, the ecosystem, the need for that connectivity, and regulators are seeing that and are acting accordingly.
Yes, and I think that there is a clear benefit. You definitely need the licensed spectrum. We're not questioning that, but the unlicensed spectrum is a necessary complement to allow a lot of use, to a lot of traffic to go through.
Yes.
So this is really important, and there is a lot of economic contribution. So clearly, from a regulatory point of view, and maybe we can sort of talk a little bit about this. Is a government, if you give unlicensed spectrum, they're going to stand to lose revenues because they don't get the licensing fees from the revenues. But at the same time, you get benefits in indirect ways. So and we had this argument in a previous sparring partners. So the fact that you don't get direct revenues doesn't mean that it's not profitable for the country, for the economy as a whole, right?
Exactly. You just mentioned two very important points, Monica. One is that 5G, no one is against license access in many frequency bands, but we need to recognize that for 5G, there is an ecosystem. So some industry stakeholders are saying that, okay, if you dedicate spectrum for Wi-Fi, they have said that to some regulators, that they are going against the 5G vision. And unfortunately, regulators have understood that that's not the case. And we really like to highlight that. Many of our members are actively promoting 5G and have partnerships with many stakeholders in the industry. The importance of Wi-Fi, it's because it's a complement. It complements very well many of the 5G use cases, because you need mobile broadband connectivity, but you also need good connectivity for fixed access. You need good connectivity at home, and there will be billions of devices connected that will also need unlicensed spectrum and enough capacity in that unlicensed spectrum. So that is the first aspect that I really like to mention, because that's relevant. I mean, Wi-Fi6 is really supporting, and Wi-Fi7 will continue doing so, supporting the 5G ecosystem. The second aspect, it's about unlicensed access, and you are completely right. In fact, the fact that it is unlicensed doesn't mean that because you don't receive, I mean, regulators don't receive incomes from an auction, but it has a huge benefit for the economy. We have been, from the DSA, we have been studying that aspect in different markets. We had a study that was first produced for Brazil, but we also had studies in Mexico, Colombia, and Peru. And we observed that there are many sources of value. So it means that, for example, if you have more spectrum for Wi-Fi, then you will have possibilities for dense environments to have better performance and better throughput and less latency. So we can also promote, for example, in LATAM, we observe how important Wi-Fi is for public policies, because many people access to internet using public hotspots and public Wi-Fi in different municipalities. And for it, they cannot afford to have Wi-Fi at home, which would be ideal, or broadband, fiber, or any other type of connectivity at home. So they rely on Wi-Fi. And we quantify that effect, and we notice that it has a great impact in GDP, in consumer surplus, and in producer surplus. So that was relevant, and we found our conclusion is that there is a huge impact in the economy. I remember from my memory that in the case of Brazil, the number was $163 billion in the next 10 years. So it's really relevant.
And I think that addresses the question that we got from the audience about making money from unlicensed spectrum, although this is more about 6 gigahertz, and we're going to get to that in a minute. I would have to say that, I completely believe that there's a huge amount of value coming from Wi-Fi, or generally unlicensed spectrum. But with Wi-Fi, it's actually challenging to find out exactly how much that is. It's a difficult task because Wi-Fi is so pervasive that just to imagine our connectivity without Wi-Fi is so hard. So it's difficult, when you want to see, what is the financial advantage from Wi-Fi? You want to compare it to a situation where you do not have Wi-Fi. And quite honestly, it's very difficult because when you think about even 4G or 5G, the reason why they're successful is because there is a Wi-Fi that basically supports them. And in fact, the first time you probably ever saw that mobile broadband, wireless broadband was possible was through Wi-Fi, because at that point 3G was just not able to deliver the experience. So people got used to it. So when 4G and 5G came along, we knew what we were looking for. So the iPhone success at the beginning was more tied to Wi-Fi than to cellular, because that's what people were using it mostly. And in fact, that's still the case. And Kendra, if you could show the slide, in our prep call, Martha and I found out that we have our favorite figure on Wi-Fi is the same one, and it's this one from the VNI, and I think that this is like the classic figure that is worth 1,000 words or whatever. And I don't know, Martha, do you want to go over and tell us what this is, or do you want me to talk about it?
I can go through it. I really like this figure because it's showing that, well, we have increased demand from users worldwide for more capacity, because there is more and more traffic. And I like in the figure to the left, you can see how they are separated by different technologies. So you can see mobile access. You can see, this is the global IP traffic. You can see fixed wired in the lower part. And you can see also access from different Wi-Fi when it is exclusively from Wi-Fi devices, so Wi-Fi only devices, or when it is from mobile devices. So I think there is a relationship, and it's not that one case replaces the other. I think that's the important part. It's like users are expecting both. They're expecting mobility, they're expecting capacity, but they're also relying on Wi-Fi when they are at different places. It could be at home, it could be at the office, it could be even when they are out in a mall, or that type of connections, even in a park. So it makes, what we can see here is that more than 50% of the traffic, of the global IP traffic, starts or ends using Wi-Fi. And that is really important conclusion, because you mentioned at the beginning, we haven't dedicated additional spectrum for Wi-Fi in many years. And I think it's time to think not only about congestion, but also about the new use cases that we would miss if we don't have enough spectrum, but some economies might just don't have access to those new use cases if they don't dedicate enough spectrum for Wi-Fi.
Yes. So let me comment on the figure on the right here, which I think is complementary, because, and in fact expands on the story that Martha was talking about, how the two are complementary. So clearly, most of the traffic that goes through mobile devices is through Wi-Fi. So licensed spectrum is essential, but it actually does not carry most of the traffic. And this is true for every country, pretty much every country people have been looking at. But if you look at it, for the sessions is actually a lot more that are cellular. But is the traffic that goes over Wi-Fi. So we use Wi-Fi and cellular in different ways. So if you do something quickly, you use cellular. You're out and about, cellular. You are at home and you want to download video, you use Wi-Fi. So it's very different type of use pattern. So now, okay, so let's talk about, as you said, we need to have more spectrum, and we're getting there with 6 gigahertz. I mean, 6 gigahertz was a huge thing, because the new amount of spectrum that we have with 6 gigahertz is so much, it just increases dramatically the capacity of the amount of unlicensed spectrum we have that Wi-Fi can use. Although it's not just for Wi-Fi, everybody can use it. So we shouldn't really call it a Wi-Fi band,
it is
because which is actually really important, because everybody can use it. 5G can use it too. But it's important as an asset for everybody to use. Now, why do we need more? As you say, okay, obviously congestion. I mean, you need more capacity to do what we already do. Cool, we know that. But there's also other applications, other use cases that need a different type. They need more spectrum, and in a way, a different type of spectrum, because there are some things you cannot do in 5 gigahertz. So yeah, can you tell us a little about that? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe before going to those new use cases that are so exciting, I wanted to mention that, and I saw a comment from Felix Oaxaca, and he's saying that Wi-Fi is essential friend of mobility, and I completely agree. So he's saying that even if you have a very good mobile capacity, you will still need a good broadband capacity at home, and that's the ideal. And probably a little comment about the figure to the right. It is not, I mean, when we talk about offload traffic, in many cases there are some confusions. Is the user that is deciding to make that configuration. It's the user that says, okay, I only want to download video or to see some applications when I am using a Wi-Fi network. And there is a reason for that, because it's related to the consumption of their plans. And I think that I also wanted to say before, the ideal scenario is to have an excellent fiber coverage, but probably we can discuss about that later. In many cases, even if there is not enough fixed access using fiber, still unlicensed access is very relevant. So maybe now I will come to your question about the new use cases. So effectively, now there are so many new applications that we need larger bandwidths. So for example, we are seeing a lot of a very exciting number of applications for very low power applications. So there is a lot of development in terms of augmented reality, virtual reality. We have seen some tests and some demos from some companies about how, if we have enough spectrum, we can have really an experience, an interactive experience, even if we are in remote communication, of feeling the other person much closer. So that is really amazing, and for that we need more bandwidth. It's not something that we can do with the current networks that maximum offer 80 megahertz of bandwidth per channel. We will need more. And also that's something we discuss with regulators. Many of them are interested on developing their own contents for augmented and virtual reality applications, for training, for education. They will need to have a local ecosystem and a way to increase and to promote that ecosystem, especially for those that are not really in a 5G environment yet, is to use these opportunities of unlicensed access in the 6 gigahertz band.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe this is going to take us to the 6 gigahertz, and now we can go back to some of the questions, because because of all those different, and especially if you think about a lot of enterprise applications where clearly you do have a need for more bandwidth and a cleaner band, which 6 GHz is pretty clean. So can we talk a little bit about why is the whole 6 GHz important? Because again, it's not just more; it's actually different as well. So
yeah,
can you?
Yeah, and an important comment is that the band is not clean. There are other services that are operating in the band. And I really would like to highlight that, because sometimes that's a common question we get all the time. Like, okay, what's going to happen with the fixed links? What's happening with the fixed satellite service applications, with the mobile applications that are not IMT, but for example, electronic news gathering? Ultra wideband. There are so many applications in that band, depending on the country or the region. And the first aspect is that we don't need to go through a clearance process. It's possible to have coexistence. And that, from the efficient use of the spectrum perspective, is great, because you're keeping everything that you already have in the band. And additionally, you're having new opportunities for unlicensed access. So that's our first aspect. And now if we see it from the Wi-Fi perspective, it's a new band. If we take into account Wi-Fi6e, we would have 7 channels of 160 megahertz each one. And that is a new greenfield. It means that those channels are, this is new spectrum for Wi-Fi. So the performance that we can expect from the devices and from the network behavior are really superior compared to what we have in the previous versions, or in the recent used frequency bands, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So that's one of the reasons, because we really would like to have that capacity. And it's not only about one or a few users accessing the spectrum. There are also many applications that are, especially in dense environments, like airports or parks or university campuses or malls, where many users are connected at the same time. So if we don't have enough frequency channels, it would be very hard to provide the requirements that they have. And because we are sharing with incumbents that need to be protected, but also with other Wi-Fi users, that's the importance of having enough channels, because it's not an exclusive access, it's a shared access.
Yeah, and well, so not only we have different channels, but also we have different use modes. So, and that's where I wanted to ask about the differences in different countries. But maybe before we go to different countries, we can talk a little bit about what's happening in the US and then compare to other countries. So in the US, you can use indoor 6 gigahertz. That's the sort of the clean part that I was referring to, where there is no interference to the point-to-point links outdoors. So that's sort of one use for the 6 gigahertz band. But then you can also use it in an outdoor situation, and there is a little bit more work that needs to be done to make sure that the spectrum is shared in a way that protects incumbents. And I think that this is really important, because we're just moving forward in exploring different ways of sharing spectrum. So CBRS is one way. 6 gigahertz, you're also sharing spectrum with incumbents, but in a very different way. And I think this is really a part of a very important process of learning what's the best way to share spectrum, because it's clear it's a good thing to share spectrum, but you have to do it right. And so we're all learning in this. So I think it's really important to see how different ways will work. So maybe let's talk a little about what's happening in the US, and then talk about what is different in other countries, maybe.
Okay. So in any use case of unlicensed access, we are protecting the incumbents. That's really, really important. In all cases, we are protecting incumbents. It's just that the techniques or the mechanisms we need to protect them are different. So for example, in low power indoors, because we are inside buildings and we have some restrictions in the regulations, like related to the antenna or to how we connect devices, that is exclusively for indoor access. In other cases, we also, so that is one type of application, one use case, low power indoor. In other cases, like very low power, the protection for incumbents is because of the very low power levels that we are using. So we talk about 14, 17 dBm and maximum IRP. And then in the case of a standard power, we need additional mechanisms. It could be in the US, the decision was to use automated frequency coordination systems. And that's how it works to protect the fixed links. And there are also some restrictions in the rules regarding the antenna propagation, the way that we have the antenna forming. So we will protect fixed satellite services. So in the case of the US, the use cases that have been approved by the FCC last year are standard power applications, 850 megahertz for standard power, and low power indoors in the entire band. So 1200 megahertz that are dedicated for low power indoor applications.
Yeah, so, but we still do not know. So for indoor, we can use it already. For outdoors, the coordination is they're still working on it. So it's work in progress to some extent, right?
Yeah, so the first step were the rules, and they are in place. And that was a clear sign to the industry to say, okay, we're going to do it. now we need to make sure that you will have all the pieces together. And now the industry is working on that. There is a multi-stakeholders group that is meeting actively with different working groups and progressing. And the next step would be, once that all those details that were missing will be finalized, then we are expecting FCC to have a procedure to have the qualification of the AFCs. So they will approve those systems operating, and then we will have the market for that. But in the meantime, so that is for standard power applications. In the meantime, we are already seeing low power indoor, because that use case doesn't need any external mechanism for coordination.
Yeah, absolutely. So now the great thing, I would say the greatest thing about Wi-Fi that actually allowed Wi-Fi to become what it is the fact that the band that was using initially, well, 2.4 at the beginning, was a global band. It was harmonized, so you can go anywhere. Actually, at the beginning, there were a few countries where you couldn't actually, or you could do only in some cases. But by and large, it was harmonized. And at 6 gigahertz, we're not quite there yet, in the sense that there's a lot of countries that are still working on it. Although every other week there is a new country joining the club, so that's good, but not necessarily in all countries. If I remember correctly, the band is the same size, so the boundaries of the band are somewhat different. Is that creating a problem, and how fast are we going in getting 6 gigahertz to be available worldwide, or almost worldwide?
Well, that's a very important question, because in fact, Wi-Fi relies on economies of scale, and that is a benefit for the general public. I mean, for all of us. That's the reason why we could have Wi-Fi chipsets in our tablets, smartphones, computers, maybe all the devices. Now smart TVs also have it. There are so many things that come with Wi-Fi integrated. So that is the reason, because we had global harmonization. And in the case of the 6 gigahertz, in just a few months, and really very quickly, we have seen the adoption of this unlicensed access. Of course, every country has different decisions. So for example, you were asking me about the US, and we mentioned that they have standard power applications and low power indoor. But for example, Brazil, they have low power indoors and very low power, and they expect to have standard power in the future. So it's creating a large ecosystem. Most of the let me go maybe by regions, that would be easier. So in the case of the Americas, we have already 8 countries that have opened the entire band. And that is amazing. That's really a great momentum. The countries are the US, Canada last week, Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, Peru, Chile, and Brazil. And I was informed by one of the IFT commissioners from Mexico today that Mexico has also decided to open a public consultation about the entire band. So that will be the second consultation they're having. So we are seeing that momentum, and other countries already had consultations in the region. So that's region 2. just with those 8 countries that I mentioned, we already have more than 70% of the regional market. And with Mexico and Colombia, if they make their final decision soon, that would be really significant market. So it means that in region 2, we almost have harmonization, and that will simplify the market. So that it's also creating momentum in other regions, and the decision from the FCC triggered that. In the case of Asia Pacific, we have seen final decisions from the Republic of Korea. They decided to open the entire band too. And we know about many other countries that have indicated that they're planning to open consultations soon. Australia just closed their consultation this month. And then those are region 2 and region 3. That is according to the International Telecommunications Union distribution. In region 1, that includes Europe, Africa, and Middle East, there is something particular, is that that region decided to study 600 megahertz for WRC23. So they are studying the right segments is from 6425 to 7025 megahertz. And they are studying if it would be possible to identify that band for IMT. It means that we don't have any certainty about the future of that band. We cannot say that that band will be used for 5G because we will only know that by 2023. So in those regions, they are mainly Africa, and some countries in Middle East are very conservative, and they're saying like, okay, let's wait for the decision of that WRC. In the case of Europe, it is different, because Europe is not because they wanted to study that band for IMT. That when we met at WRC 19, they didn't propose to have an agenda item for IMT. But in the past, they started studying just 500 megahertz in the lower part of the band. And that's why they moved forward, and they adopted a decision recently in November that was decided to open for license exempt access the lower 500 megahertz of the band. Now we are also seeing that some countries in Europe are interested in considering the upper part of the band for license exempt access. And I think that would be very, very important if they decide as CEPT and us for Europe to study that upper part, because then they will have the 1200 megahertz too, and they will have the same opportunities that other countries that are that have adopted the entire band are having. So that's controversial. We are seeing all these discussions. Today, Morocco has also announced that they decided to open the lower part of the band for unlicensed access. So this is every week. It's amazing. Every week we are seeing a new country, a new consultation. It has been a lot of work, but I think it just reflects how important Wi-Fi is for connectivity, is for public policy, and the impact that this technology is having in the society right now.
Yeah, and actually we had sparring partners with the Wi-Fi Alliance and the European regulator in last fall. So you can find out, you can watch it offline. And yeah, it's really, there's so many news about this, but there's also a lot of operators are arguing that to give all the spectrum for unlicensed access is sort of unwarranted because it should be licensed. And I don't know what you think about it, but well, actually I do kind of, I can guess, but I think that the argument there is a little bit, as we said before, you want to have licensed spectrum no matter what. But for something, as you go higher in frequencies, I think that the argument for unlicensed spectrum gets stronger because with unlicensed spectrum, you can reuse spectrum more efficiently, which is what's happening with the Wi-Fi spectrum, right? It's used, I mean, the same amount of megahertz is used so much more intensely than any licensed band. And this is obviously the case because you can share it, so more people can use it. And as you go up in the frequency, you can be even more efficient in reusing because the reach is lower. So to me, the higher you go, the more unlicensed you want. I mean, that's my personal view. But more importantly, or as important, if you are a mobile operator, nobody is going to stop you from using 6 gigahertz. And in fact, you can use 5G NRU if you want to. So nobody is telling mobile operators they cannot use the band. They just need to share it in the same way that they can share CBRS in the US. So I really do not see much of it. And they don't seem to have too much success in lobbying the 6 gigahertz for license use. So, but what is your view on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it that way. I think that those that have the power of decision, those are the regulators. Mm-hmm. And what they're hearing from industry, from all different industry stakeholders, are the technical arguments. And then they make decisions based on that. We have seen many countries that have been very active working on 5G. And I really like to give the example, the US, the Republic of Korea, Saudi Arabia, Chile. Those are countries that are leaders in 5G adoption. So, so it's clear that they don't see an issue saying like, okay, we need a balance. And probably the balance is not to take one frequency band and split it between different services. It's trying to find the right trade-off. So in this case, 6 gigahertz band is really a good trade-off for unlicensed, where you need enough channels. But it doesn't mean that regulators shouldn't dedicate also spectrum for 5G. And in fact, they are doing it. We are seeing that there is a lot of activity all the time. Also, we hear about 5G auctions in low band, mid band, high band. But again, I come back to my first comment about the 5G ecosystem. That ecosystem has 4 pillars: low band, mid band, high band, and unlicensed, and it should be recognized as such. So we are seeing that there is a lot of capacity in high band frequencies, so millimeter waves, that were just approved at the last WRC 19. There was a lot of spectrum that was identified for IMT. We have also seen a lot of movement in mid band, depending on the conditions of every country, and also in low band with 700, 800, even 600 in some countries, 600 megahertz. So I would say that the regulators are understanding that it's not taking one band and say like, okay, I will split it for different things. In the case of Wi-Fi, the industry is not requesting access to other bands. I mean, it's fine if those are used for license access. The Wi-Fi industry right now is focused only on the 6 gigahertz band. And there are all the technical arguments about coexistence, the technical arguments about how they can work for different use cases, the economic benefits, and also the ecosystem is there. So I think it's not saying that one is more successful than the other. Both need each other. I mean, users will expect 5G capabilities when they have mobile applications, and Wi-Fi is providing those great capabilities at home for fixed access, but also with many devices that are connected around. So from my perspective, it's not one or the other, is that they are not rivals. The both are required.
Now, I would like to go back to a question that we got from the audience and expand it a bit. So Pranav is asking, right now people are, especially at home, are happy with AC and N. And so what do we need a killer app to motivate people to move to Wi-Fi 6? And I would like to make it wider and to think about, would a home user need to go to Wi-Fi 6 or use the 6 gigahertz band when what they have is enough? And I would say, well, if what they have is enough, yes, you don't need to upgrade. And why should you? I personally do not have a Wi-Fi 6 access point because I don't need it right now. And so I'm very happy with what I have. However, the next time I'm going to buy an access point is going to be a 6, and I have 6 on my phone, because you just move gradually. And I think that this is a great thing about Wi-Fi, is that when you get to Wi-Fi 6, you don't have to throw away everything that is Wi-Fi 5, because everything keeps working. So whenever you need, it's sort of like a gradual move. And what we have seen with the previous versions, people gradually upgrade. So it's not like with 5G where you just, or with any new cellular technology, where when that one comes in, you need a new device, you need to change everything. So it's a much sort of sharp move. Here you just, so we don't need everybody at home to need Wi-Fi 6. And I think there's going to be a lot of new applications, but at the same time, we don't have to be in a situation where everybody tomorrow has to go out and buy Wi-Fi 6. And that's a great thing, because you just deploy where you need it. But for the enterprise, that is a different business. This is a different case, because for a lot of enterprises, you do see congestion. And so having more spectrum, having Wi-Fi 6, actually Wi-Fi 6 helps you. We don't need any new applications, but for the applications and use cases that we have, it's really important to have Wi-Fi 6 because it allows you to manage traffic more efficiently. So it's not the QoS that you have in cellular, but it's much closer to it. So there are a lot of advantages to do that, but again, it's not true that every enterprise will have to upgrade to Wi-Fi 6 tomorrow. It's going to be a gradual thing, and I don't see anything wrong with it. I mean, it's perfectly fine. We don't have to all do it tomorrow. It's a sort of, but eventually everybody will be moving to Wi-Fi 6, and same thing with 6 gigahertz. I don't need to use 6 gigahertz at home today, but maybe next year I will.
Yeah, what I could say is that it's not only about one requirement. I mean, Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7 will bring a lot of improvements. So it's about the high data rates, it's about the low latency, it's about being able to handle more devices connected, improve security, more batteries last also for longer time. So I think all those come together. You perfectly mentioned that at home we usually don't feel it, but please keep in mind that that's not for everyone. I know the case of someone that was complaining and saying, "Oh, my internet connection is awful. It doesn't work as it should. I'm paying a lot for the fixed access and that." And then it was a friend who works for a tech company, and when he reviewed the details, is that she was using a router that was so old. I mean, it was not even Wi-Fi 5. So he was like, well, that's part of the reason. So if you have the regulations in place and you start having access to the latest technology, then it's going to progressively be improved because people are going to get the devices. In the case of companies, it also takes a while. I have seen many projects recently about, for example, a new stadium that is having now all Wi-Fi 6 implemented. And it takes a lot of time because it's certainly an important investment. So, if the technology is there, I mean, if those users have the choice of Wi-Fi 6e instead of just Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi, that will certainly change their business model because they will have the best performance in the short term, and that for sure will affect their plans. And the same in companies. It takes a while. You don't expect the regulations to be here and next month to have a lot of devices in use. It takes a while, especially for those type of clients that need to go through a long process internally. But I agree with you. I mean, once the regulations are in place, the transition will go smoothly. That's what we have seen in the past. And that's what also we expect that will happen with these devices. We are seeing also, I was mentioning about the ecosystem, but now more smartphones are including the capabilities of Wi-Fi 6e. There are a lot of chipsets, more vendors and equipment are providing their solutions. I saw one of our members announce, HPE Aruba announced that they have now also their own Wi-Fi 6e equipment for business. So it's really, I think that's how it works in the telecom sector, and the applications will come at the same time. It's a parallel process. It's not that you have the killer app and then you have the standard. It goes kind of at the same time. I was mentioning the examples of virtual reality, augmented reality. They will trigger a lot of usage of spectrum, but we are also seeing more video and multimedia consumption. That's constantly increasing. So I think it will go by itself, and we will see a lot of adoption in the coming months.
Yeah, and actually, if you think back, when 5 gigahertz was added to Wi-Fi, so initially it was only 2.4, right? And for quite a few years, the 5 gigahertz band was actually hardly used. I mean, it was used, but not as much. So everybody was still be crowded in 2.4. So it just took some time. It's just like any technology takes time. But then now everybody uses 5 gigahertz, and I think something similar will happen. And in fact, so we actually have a question about AR and requiring low latency. And so is that an argument for using 5G? And I would say, well, yes and no, because if you're using 6 gigahertz, actually the latency for Wi-Fi on the access link is actually very low. That's not the problem. The problem is that if you have a lot of traffic, and if you have congestion, then it's an issue. So for a lot of AR applications, which are not mission critical, I think you can use Wi-Fi very well, especially like if in a home environment. And in fact, and I think that this could be a sort of a killer app, and in the fact, and and also video connectivity within the home. I mean, there actually I could use Wi-Fi 6 right today, because you don't, you want to have a better way to manage traffic, which is what Wi-Fi 6 gives. So even for things like AR, I don't think you really need. I mean, you might use 5G, but on the other hand, if you're within the home Wi-Fi might be lower latency than 5G from a macro outside the home, which is shared with a lot. So I don't know. What do you think?
That's a great reflection, and I think that it's not only the technical part of it. So Wi-Fi 6 is providing very low latency that if you compare with many applications in the past, were not possible. Wi-Fi 7 will be even improved. So we are expecting to see a lot of improvement. However, I would say that there is also a part that is related to the cost. So if you compare the cost of, I mean, again, I mentioned that for Wi-Fi, the cost of the trade-off is you could have better, more affordable equipment compared to other technologies that could provide similar performance. So that is related. And I think that even if you could have, let's imagine that you could have only virtual and augmented realities through 5G. It would make things complicated if you would need only licensed access for every device that would be using that type of applications. So we think that in many applications, you won't need, I mean, it's much better to have unlicensed access with excellent capacity, so many devices could be connected at the same time in a reduced environment. So instead of using licensed spectrum there, you could use unlicensed, and that would have more affordable equipment, chipsets that are included in all the devices. I was mentioning about like smart TVs, smartphones, tablets, equipment for activities, for games, all that. And I think it will make sense at the end in terms of the business case for users, in fact.
Yeah, and actually we have another question from Dylan here about the impact that the pandemic is having in pushing more Wi-Fi use. And I would like to sort of, and that's actually connected to the fiber to the home. So, if you have fiber to the home, then you want to have a good within the home network. And that's where, again, I mean, Wi-Fi 6 might be an advantage, because then you start using it a lot for a lot of applications that are actually important, like education, work, and whatever, a lot of more video. So I think that will push a little bit Wi-Fi 6 kind of adoption. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there are two parts, and it's important to understand that the requirements are different. So in those cases where we have fiber to the home, it's great because we could have a lot of capacity, and then Wi-Fi 6 will really provide that last part of the connectivity with excellent performance. So that is an easy case, and in our economic studies we were able to quantify the impact of that in the assessment of the economic benefits, and it's very important. But in cases where you don't have that access of fiber to the home, it's still very important to have unlicensed access. Let me probably just imagine an example here. If we don't have fiber to the home, let's say that we have a great fixed wireless access connection to the home. So I could have a great fixed wireless access to my terminal, to my smartphone, and then I could try to share that capacity with other devices. But they will need unlicensed access, because otherwise I should connect each of those devices to the fixed wireless access network. So it doesn't make sense to have a great video capacity in my smartphone, but then not being able to have it in my smart TV or in other devices. And that's one part. And the other part is, even for those countries that don't have enough fiber penetration, have very, very low fiber penetration, in those cases, the relevance is not exclusively about having Wi-Fi at home. It's about having Wi-Fi or unlicensed access in public hotspots where there are many people using the service at the same time. It's also about having the possibility of standard power applications outdoors, because ISPs, we haven't spoken about them, internet service providers in many countries are the only ones that are working on providing that affordable service for many users. In the case of Brazil, we quantified the effect, and that was huge. That was really important because they are covering thousands of users in the country. So they would, if they have more unlicensed spectrum access in the 6 gigahertz band, they will continue covering those users, but with much better performance. And that is important. Even ITU has a lot of studies that recognizes how important Wi-Fi is for public access. Many municipalities have those programs. In many countries, there are national programs that are promoting Wi-Fi hotspots and Wi-Fi access in parks, in public spaces, in public entities. So we see that even in those cases that don't have enough fiber penetration, we expect them to have it in the short term and medium or short term. But in the meantime, they can already benefit from that access.
Yeah, and actually also there is another use case where people might have a phone or some other device that is connected, and they can share it locally with the other devices or other people just nearby. So it's like a sort of a temporary hotspot, if you wish. Now, there is I wanted to get back to you because clearly Wi-Fi or the unlicensed band 5 gigahertz can be used for access, which is really important. And we have a question here, which I think it's a very good question from Anna, and she's asking, does it make sense to keep growing fixed links in 6 gigahertz? So, and she talks about how important that is in Latin America. So, I guess that the question here, I've been sort of thinking about it, is if you make 6 gigahertz unlicensed for use even outdoors, like it is in the US, is this going to reduce the use for links in 6 gigahertz, which could be used to provide fixed wireless access? So I guess the thing is that if you increase the unlicensed use, will that kind of detract from using it for licensed?
No, I wouldn't say so. So I agree that in many countries, there are some tables that are internationally accepted for microwave links and for fixed access. And 6 gigahertz band is one of those bands. So we have seen in the region, in the Americas, that there are many links in that band. For example, in the US, there were more than 100,000 links. In many countries also, there are thousands of links. And that's one of the beautiful parts I mentioned before, that in the case of Wi-Fi or unlicensed access, you don't need to stop those links. You don't need to relocate them. You don't need to go through a clearance process that could be very complicated, very expensive, and could take a lot of time. In this case, you are just sharing the spectrum. You can have access to Wi-Fi. Now, about the question from Anna about the traffic, I think it's important to keep fixed links. Personally, I think that they're covering a very important service that's extremely relevant. They're like the backbone for telecommunications in many places. So, and the fact that we are having a low frequency band is also positive because of the coverage. So there are other frequency bands. There are 15 gigahertz, 18 gigahertz that could be used for fixed links, but that will depend on the policies and on the decisions of every regulator. In some cases, it's also related to how much users pay for those links, because I know in many cases it could be too expensive, so it's hard for them to keep those links. But I would say here you could have a great trade-off. You could keep fixed links that are important for capacity and for transmission, again, as like the backbone of telecommunications in many countries. And at the same time, you can have the performance of unlicensed access and Wi-Fi access. So I think it makes a good match. And some providers might decide to use those links, pay for microwave. They're much directive. You can have higher power levels. So it's not also a competition with unlicensed access. It's something different, and you could, and users will have the options and the choice according to their needs.
Okay, so let me sort of like a little bit of housekeeping here. So we have a question about forecasts for different versions of Wi-Fi. I can go through the. You can get back to me offline on that. But there, as far as I see, I don't see there is any forecast yet for Wi-Fi 7 because it's going to be, launched. I mean, the standardization is going to be completed in 2024, so it's way out there. So you know not yet, not there yet. Um, Now, the other thing is that there was a question
Monica,
from Joseph. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
probably just to mention, IDC calculated that we could expect just in North America for Wi-Fi6e, more than 300 million devices. So I think that's a number. We don't have the numbers for Wi-Fi 7, as you mentioned, but I think it gives an indication of how this is growing and how it's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. You have better memory than I do. Now, you also asked about if all devices might support Wi-Fi 6 in order to benefit from Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6 access point. I think that this is managed better than in previous versions, but also if you use 6 gigahertz, you don't have any. Everything is going to be Wi-Fi 6. So in that sense, it's you have no other choice. Then we have another question from Vinay about unlicensed spectrum and ways to minimize interference from users nearby. And I think, talk about private networks. I think that there are ways to minimize interference because you can user listen before talk. So there are already ways to manage it, and with Wi-Fi 6, it's getting better. So but clearly it's contended, so everybody has to use it. So I wouldn't think about interference. It's a way to share the spectrum, and you have to manage the sharing.
Exactly. I think Wi-Fi has been created since the beginning. It has been thought and designed for sharing. So it's not like other technologies that are relying on just exclusive access. Wi-Fi is designed, the standard itself, all the aspects of the standard are designed for sharing. So I think that it's, and we see it, it's the only way to explain how with so little, such a little amount of spectrum, we are having billions of users, because that has been designed as a way for everyone to coexist, listen before talk. There are so many mechanisms. So I think we cannot compare with other technologies that have been designed for exclusive access. This is something that is providing that since the beginning, and is providing that capability of coexistence with so many different techniques.
Yeah, and actually this, since there is a mention about private networks, I think it's important to also talk a little bit about, how much, well, clearly you need spectrum, unlicensed spectrum that Wi-Fi can use in order to have everybody to use it. But there is more than that in terms of facilitating. So one thing is to have a big market so the prices of equipment are low, which we do have. Because, if Wi-Fi equipment was 10 times as expensive, the use would be much lower. But also there are other ways. So for instance, initiatives like open roaming and Passpoint make it easier for people to get access to whatever Wi-Fi is there. Especially if you go into a hotspot, you want to make sure it's secure, it's trusted. So that provides sort of an added on if the infrastructure there is used. And then recently there is the open Wi-Fi initiative from TIP, which when I heard about it, like, what do we need open Wi-Fi? It's already open. It's there's interoperability, which is really important. You can put any equipment and it works. And in fact, there is a way that the contention is managed. What do we need it? And actually, it sort of addresses the issue, not in interference, but to have multiple networks in the same locations. And with open Wi-Fi, you have a way to manage a network where you have different vendors. And this is really, I think this is going again in the direction of beyond spectrum, so to say. So spectrum, if you don't have spectrum, you're not going anywhere. But if you do have spectrum, there are ways to further encourage the adoption of Wi-Fi and a cost-effective adoption. So you use different different vendors if that's what you need to have in an enterprise.
I think this is so exciting what is happening now in the industry. You just mentioned one example of open Wi-Fi, but there are so many examples. Even one of our members, HP Aruba, has recently joined with Celona, another company. And even we are seeing, and that is amazing because they're really customer oriented. They are saying, what do you need? I mean, what are your expectations? So in some cases, it's like, okay, there are many Wi-Fi networks. I would like to be able to go and to use all of them. In many cases, companies are saying, I would like to have a good combination between my mobile network, that's mainly in the US because we have CBRS, and then my unlicensed access network, my Wi-Fi. And now industry is coming to some incredible solutions where you are mixing according to what they need. So you could have that flexibility, like, okay, if you need certain requirements for mobile usages, for a quality of service that are expecting 3GPP networks, okay, go for it. And their spectrum sharing is very useful because that's what we are doing with CBRS. But if you would like to benefit from everything that we mentioned about Wi-Fi, like affordable access and opportunities and many users, etc., we can combine. And I think that's the magic of it. It's not saying, okay, this is only one technology and this is the only one we have to use. It's like, what are users expecting? Which are the trade-offs? And then try to make sure that we can have the best solution according to the needs. And in those cases, I think we can combine so many interesting solutions and techniques.
Yeah, and what you mentioned is particularly interesting because, we often just think about access, but access is only part of the equation. From a user perspective, it's actually ease of access, so to say. So whenever you show up in a place, you don't care whether it's 5G or Wi-Fi, you just want to be connected. And this is exactly what's happening. And I think CBRS it's a great thing in terms of making sure that you can use, like your credentials that you use for Wi-Fi, and you can be used also for CBRS, for instance, so that it doesn't matter what access channel you're using, you're connected. You don't have to do anything special. So I think that's really, so anyway, we're at the top of the hour. So Martha, if you have any closing thoughts, otherwise we should let everybody continue.
Yeah, I would just invite everyone to attend the DSA Summit. You will hear from experts, you will hear from regulators. We have a great balance between industry speakers and government speakers. So don't miss it. I mean, it will be just 5 sessions with a lot of content and good content. So I just would like to invite all the participants to register and to participate at the summit.
And there's going to be more than Wi-Fi because there's so many, we don't realize, but actually shared spectrum is not a new thing. I mean, it's becoming more important, but we have been sharing spectrum all along. So the fact that there is more to do, I think it's great. So thank you, Martha, for taking the time to talk to all of us. And Kendra, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much to our speakers today. That will conclude our webinar. A recorded version as well as a podcast audio version will be made available on the senzafili.com website in the coming days. And we will have future events on that website as well. So please check back for our next webinars. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.